And thanks for the introduction, and thanks to my fellow panelists for setting up the scene for my presentation. Today, I'll be talking about refugees and asylum seekers as labeled, but what I want to focus on are people and perceptions we have about these people and the power and the privileges, and under the framework of the theme that we're discussing today, which is racism, which as a concern in public mental health. I'm Mohamed, and I currently moved to London and developing a refugee program. And in the past, I worked directly with asylum seeker refugees. So in this presentation, and I'll be sharing some of my reflections and experience working with these groups, but also my own thoughts on this. Does not necessarily mean that this reflects the thoughts of the organization I'm representing. And please, if I'm talking too fast or there's something you don't understand what I'm saying, please use the chat functions to highlight some of the points, and I'll be more than happy to clarify them. And so I'll be talking about three key things, but, the people themselves and the perception that we have about these people and the power dynamic that exists in around asylum seeking and refugee communities in the UK. First and foremost, I want to share 5 key facts that are very important and basic facts that sometimes we may overlook. The refugees are people, and people that have been uprooted from their homes and communities, and they had no choice to go wherever they want. The people escape from war zones, from persecutions, and what they're looking for is safety. I really like a quote that Shira used: "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark," which illustrates the danger that people are running away, and no one will leave their comfort or around their family and the place they know, really. And the second point is that the majority of these people are victims of persecution, including racist abuses, and they've been exposed to, they may have been exposed to traumatic experience and events themselves. So those are people that are escaping from a very dangerous place, seeking safety and an opportunity to rebuild. And like all of us, all they want, it's a place to stay, a role to play, and a community to belong to. Basic needs that everyone should have access to. And the fourth point, and sometimes we overlook this point, is that when we talk about asylum seeker refugees, they're not a homogeneous group. By that, I mean that people from these communities are from different nationalities, they come from different ethnic groups, religion, languages, like some very diverse groups. And personally, I think they're a gift to this to wherever they land, so that they can enrich us culturally, financially, socially, and all in all its forms. But sometimes the way we think about asylum seeker refugees, we group them together, and it's easier to otherize them, which I'll be speaking about in my next slide. The other important aspect about these people is that it's key to understand their journeys and their lived experience told by them, without us making assumptions and making up story, their own stories, owning their story. So an understanding of the 3 key stages of migration, and before they left, and where they come from, the journey that they're going through in their migration and in their post-migration journey. And that gives us an insight about some of the challenges and the factors around their mental health. And it's important that comes from their voices and their experience rather important for us, making those narratives for them. In the UK, and apologies if I'm stating the obvious here, we use these two terms in the refugee sector: asylum seekers and refugees, and it's important to distinguish that. And the reason I'm using it now is because they have different entitlements and different rights in the UK. In an asylum seeker is someone who has made a claim to the Home Office for asylum, but is not yet recognized as a refugee under the 1951 Refugee Convention, and it's a human right to seek asylum in another country, specifically in the UK, because the UK it's a signatory of the 1951. So there's a legal obligation that sometimes we don't talk about in the media, but we rather politicize this group. And a refugee is someone who was an asylum seeker, and that their application has been successful, and usually they gain their leave to remain, and which enables them to stay 5 years in the country. And if the situation in their own country has not changed, then they can apply to stay permanently in the UK. And generally, a refugee have the same rights as someone as a UK citizen. So understanding people, it's very important rather than labeling them and making up stories for them. Specifically in relation to the theme that we're covering today around racializing and othering groups, and I think it's very important to cover perception. And when we cover perception, language matters, because what we read, what we consume intellectually, or and our life experiences inform our perceptions, and it's very important that we combat that, and we seek to address to find facts around the people and what they are. For example, my first point I make around the language that we use. If, for example, now if you put on Google bogus, fraudulent, threat, illegal, you'll probably get some results related to asylum seekers and refugees in the country. And we're talking about people, and as I said in my slides, these are people that have been going through a lot, and we must ask ourselves, why are we getting these results? So is there something beyond our understanding of people, and also the fact that historically the UK, in fact, some of the drafters of the UK Convention were British lawyers, and where we are now with the politics around this topic, it's horrible. And if you can see the poster here, Breaking Point, and I'm sure like some of you may have across during the Brexit campaign, it's very much inaccurate, and also scary, for someone who's as an asylum seeker, and the fact that there's very little challenge around that, and as I always say, the one with the bigger microphone has a louder voice. That's where we are, and that's a concern. That's a concern, and we start thinking, like, how do we get from politicizing and making people others. And I wrote global events and impact on local lives as my next point, and two events that I think that we must consider when we look into that. It's the 9/11 and the recent global recession, when this narrative around othering and racializing the conversation in public discourse is becoming normalized, and it's becoming more prevalent and more acceptable in public domain. again, it's something that that's untrue. You know, like it's something that we must combat. And looking at the data, proliferation of social media helps that, and fake news and the post-truth world, and we are really in a very difficult situation now where it's difficult to make a point around the compassion and the humanitarian language that we should be using to safeguard, protect, and population. And now we're talking about bordering and securitization language on this team. So that's a political football. And again, working in the mental health narrative again, and we're sometimes victim of our own perception and defining people resilient or vulnerable, depending on what, without mainly having these people at the table and talking for themselves. So I thought that I would give you a bit of 5 key points that I thought were relevant in our conversation around racializing the language on this team, around perception and without seeking real knowledge. My next slide is around power and the power dynamics that exist within individuals and institutions. And currently we have two pathways in the refugee sector. We have the asylum pathway and the refugee resettlement pathway. And as I said earlier, you know, when someone comes into the country, they'll have to submit asylum claim, they'll have to go through a screening interview, substantive interview, which means that they'll have to retell their story of trauma and the story of not being believed, you know, making a case for themselves, and then going all this through the system without with language barriers, new culture, maybe, you know, there's the a gendered approach where, you know, single woman would come in and they have to go through all of that, and they've been they've perhaps been going through gender focused trauma, and that is something that needs to be considered. And on the other side, and sometimes the refugee resettlement is seen as the most that the way that the UK should go forward in the future. But then again, it's about picking and choosing which refugees should come into the country, and the criteria that is being used, and it's the danger that this can be abused and othering and going to that team of the good and bad immigrant. So that it's I hope it gives you a bit of an insight around the power dynamic that exists around that. Again, the immigration and segregation is the scariest part about, you know, talking about the border bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, and linking up with immigration. It's becoming such a security issue rather than a human rights approach that we should cover this topic. And when we talk about security issue, then where does the mental health needs of this community would come in the agenda? So it's quite scary. The resettlement and integration of refugee, again, sometimes these are positive, but sometimes we define what resettlement means and integration means to people. And I think we should do a bit more by including and listening to the voices of the communities that are being resettled in our communities, and making sure that community cohesion and integration being a two-way part, where, as I said, these are like people that bring lots of gift to us in terms of cultures, of how are we not benefiting from them, but we're seeing them as aliens almost. And my last, a very important point, it's about understanding for communities around hate crime. And the UK has some of the most, I would say, arguably one of the strongest hate crime legislation in the UK. However, for this group, is given the different barriers, it may be very difficult to understand how it works and the reporting system. If there's no trust with the authorities, very, very difficult for someone to go forward to report a hate crime, understand whether they are victim of the hate crime, and be more accepting of being victims of racism, for example. It's prevalent among this community, but also but also trying to make sure that hate crime is literally defined, and the mechanism work for everyone. And I think it's very difficult. It goes back to the land round. But when you're an asylum seeker, going to the police may be difficult, because if you're thinking of reporting a hate crime, you may think like that may jeopardize your immigration status and all of that. So I think there's a lot of things to be doing better, and for us to be aware of our privileges and power, the dynamics that exist between individuals and organization. In conclusion, it's the five key takeaways that I hope I can offer in this presentation. It's to understand and appreciate the people and communities that live among us, and their needs and how they can contribute in their new community, and proactively to challenge the myths and misinformation, which is sometimes go on social media and you read certain things, you're thinking like, how on earth this is things, and you can see people retweeting about it as well, which is horrible. And voice and visibility, and making sure that there's a seat at the table for people with lived experience in the refugee sector, and for us as researcher, policy and practitioners, making sure that we are aware of our privileges, and we are aware of the assumptions that we make of community, and acknowledging and embracing refugee lived experience in the mental health sector would go a long way in trying to be truly person-centric approach. So these are like some of my reflection, and be more than happy to contribute with the answers later on. Thank you.